Thank you all so much for coming. I believe that our conversation today is going to be very, very powerful and will spark off all sorts of things. Please remember that part of the purpose of our gathering today is to also ignite and inspire you with regards to starting men's groups. That's the way we are going this year. We really want to do this. Not everyone has to do it, but if you feel in your heart that, you know what, I want to meet with some men and form some accountability with them, then talk to me and we'll help you in terms of that. But today we're going to talk about the high EQ man, the high EQ man. A couple of years ago, my youngest son, Daniel, who was about 8 years old at the time, came up to me and asked, "Daddy, how come I only see women crying and the men never cry, Dad? Dad, do you cry?" So I shared with my son that some men don't want to be seen crying, but a lot of men do cry. I believe that what Daniel was really asking was whether I cry and if it was fine for him to cry too. That's what a youngster wants to know from their father. Dad, do you cry? And is it okay for me as a boy to cry? I told him that I sometimes get teary when I'm watching a movie, but I wanted to reassure him that it was okay to be able to express his emotions and it was okay for him to cry. Now, more recently, my kids were fascinated when they were watching the video where I was making that announcement of Pastor Taffy's death. And remember, as I announced it to the church, I broke down and I started to cry. And they were saying things like, "We've never seen Dad like this before." You know, they were fascinated by that. They were commenting around that, right? So whatever they see me doing or not doing, I know they're taking their cue from me. Whatever they see me doing or not doing, they're taking their cue from me. And so I'm highlighting this because sometimes we forget that how we are passes on to the people around us, okay? And many of you are fathers here of girls, okay, and of boys. So behavior is learned, and our emotional intelligence muscle can be developed if we first give ourselves permission to feel. Our emotional intelligence muscle can be developed if we give ourselves permission to feel. Are you giving yourself permission to feel? You know, Justin, you've just been through a really tough time losing your mom. Are you giving yourself permission to grieve? Sipo, you went through a similar thing, you know, some time back. And we've spoken at length about it also. And the power of grieving, the power of, you've just had people in your family getting sick and so on. And you've had powerful conversations with some of the members of your family around, "Hey, let's talk. How are we feeling about all of this?" You see, very often as men, we're survivors. Because if we feel too much, then we crumble. And the people who are depending on us, we feel like, but they need us as a pillar. So very often we end up suppressing a lot of what we're actually feeling. So we tend to internalize stress. Have you noticed that? Very often our wives will express their stress and they get frustrated when we just keep quiet because they're thinking, you know, aren't we aware of the situation? Because we tend to internalize it. Part of being a high EQ man, part of being high on emotional intelligence is being able to be emotionally self-aware. And we're going to go into that shortly. So EQ stands for emotional quotient, and it's what we use to measure emotional intelligence. Now, you should all know that in the past, people focused just on IQ. You know, how book smart are you? But one of the things I found myself telling a group of smart people, they'd come for some graduate course, and they were in a graduate group, you know. They had done really well academically, and they'd been hired by their company, and they were now in this particular group. And we were teaching them, we were training them. And you know what I said to them? I said, you guys, do you know what my concern is? You're really, really smart, but my concern is you're going to be overtaken by people who've got what I call the other stuff. And I said to them, what's the other stuff? And they told me it's things like emotional intelligence, resilience, assertiveness. And I said to them, because you know what the problem with us smart people is? Us smart people in this room. That's all we were rewarded for. A lot of people who are smart, that's all they were rewarded for. So they got the maths prize at school, the science prize at school. They passed their degrees cum laude. They are the ones that got the bursary. And as a result of that, they end up coming up with what we call a misbelief, what I call a misbelief. In other words, a lie. And the lie they believe is, my smartness alone will get me to the top. It won't. Sean, I'm sure you've seen that. You're a smart guy, but your smartness alone won't get you to the top. Because sometimes you find yourself presenting something at work, and then it's the guy next to you who gets the buy-in. And you're wondering, why is he getting the buy-in from the people and not me? My thing was flawless, but I can see the gaps, cracks, and leakages in his stuff. And that's because people buy from brands they like, people buy from brands they have an emotional connection with, and people buy from brands that they trust. And you get to that place of connecting with other people through your emotional intelligence. Research has found that on average, women score higher than men on the relational aspects of EQ. Now, whether this is due to neurobiological factors or it is because of how we've been socialized, it's not the issue I want to discuss today. The key thought I would like to propose is that emotional intelligence competencies and capabilities will empower men to have a happier and healthier marriage, period. To have happier and healthier marriages, healthier and happier parenting, healthy and happier friendships, healthy and happier business life, if our EQ is strong. And the problem with the education system in our nation is it's very focused on whatever you were studying. Have you noticed that? So if you go and you study accounting, that's all you focus on. I think I said this, it was at the Kingdom Financiers meeting. You go and you study accounting, that's all you focus on. But what I've noticed is that guys from the States, they work with the liberal arts approach. And with the liberal arts system, it's very broad initially. You do all sorts of subjects, and then you specialize. So you speak to this guy from the States who's an engineer, but he's talking emotional intelligence stuff. And you think to yourself, did he study psychology too? Okay? We're going to need certain skills in our lives that are linked to EQ. We need those things. With the fourth industrial revolution that we're in right now, we're going to be managing virtual teams, aren't we? We're going to have someone who's doing your coding in India, someone else who you're working with, but they're in Russia, someone else you're working with, and they're in Polokwane, and you're managing a team of these people. Communication skills are key. You're getting people to do stuff for you, but these people aren't being watched by you all the time. I still remember teaching some people from Murray and Roberts at the time, and it was a leadership class. And I remember they said to me, Paul, this EQ stuff you're teaching us is really great just for the office. But Paul, on site, it's different. Jean is laughing. On site, it's different. And they started to educate me about life on site. But what I've noticed is there's a tendency for men, when we talk about emotional intelligence, EQ, we tend to poo-poo it. We tend to despise it. We tend to think that's for the softies, okay? We tend to have that approach. But you know what research has found? Research has found that the men who actually climb the corporate ladder most effectively are actually the ones that have worked on their emotional intelligence. Because the higher up you go, if you're a CEO of an organization, you can't be saying to your COO or your CFO, I don't pay you to think, you must just listen to me. You can't be talking to them like that. The higher up you go, a lot of the people who are reporting directly to you may be smarter than you. If you're a good leader and you hire people that are smarter than you, okay? So there's a way you have to manage them where you say, guys, what do you think? There's a way you have to motivate them, where you create an environment where they become self-motivated. We need emotional intelligence for that. So who is better on average, men or women, when it comes to emotional intelligence? People will say women, and they're right when it comes to the relational aspects of emotional intelligence. But let me ask you another question. Amongst top leaders, who's better at EQ, men or women? Research has found that there's no difference. In other words, amongst leaders, it's the same. And that's why I say to you, the men who've risen up in terms of promotion, in terms of enlarging their influence, a lot of these men have worked on their emotional intelligence. And like I said at the start, emotional intelligence is something you can work on. It's a muscle you can build. And very often what tends to happen is we define ourselves in a very limited way. Have you noticed that? I sometimes counsel people and you hear them saying things like, Paul, that's just not me. I never cry. It's just not me. Right? And then when we start working on this type of thing, you start seeing that the person starts discovering sides of themselves that they never knew before. You hear people say, I'm not a people person. Not me. No. Don't get me up there speaking in front of people. That's just not me. No, it's your wounded you. Because when you experience emotional healing and we break off the fear of man off you, what happens? Now you're doing it. So sometimes we've got a limited definition of who we are. I want to encourage you this afternoon that if you feel you've got gaps in your emotional intelligence, that can change. I often say to people, it's fixable. It's fixable. It's fixable. So what a lot of people don't realize is that there's a difference between emotionalism and emotional awareness. Emotionalism is where you are ruled by your feelings. It's where you have the mindset that says, because I'm feeling this way, then how I'm feeling is the truth. You know people like that, right? No, you guys, no one likes me. How do you know? I feel it. I feel so rejected. Well, that's how you're feeling. And you don't see the world as it is. You see the world as you are. You're looking at the world through your own filters. So there's emotionalism, and we're not encouraging that. But then there's emotional awareness, where I'm in touch with my emotional state, and I'm able to say, guys, you know what? I felt quite insecure yesterday because of A, B, C, D. That's what we're talking about. That's the first pillar of emotional intelligence. It's emotional self-awareness. As we go through this, remember, we're going to have a discussion afterwards. So just take note of things that are jumping out at you where you feel like, you know what? This is something I need to work on. I want to go deeper in this particular area. And then for those of you who've just come in, please remember, part of what we're going to be encouraging is people to start groups where it's men with men. And we'll hold each other accountable, and it's going to be very powerful. All right? So emotionalism is where we're never measured in our approach to things. You know when someone is measured, has a measured approach. I'm not talking about a poker face all the time, but I'm talking about where, you know what, you don't just blab out everything. You don't just go into a room and just say, I'm so angry with you and I'm so angry with you. At least I'm being honest. No. That's emotionalism. Okay? Emotionalism is where we define reality based on our current emotional state. I'm right because of what I feel. I feel this way, therefore it's true. Emotional intelligence is a completely different construct. So emotional intelligence has about 5 different pillars. I'm only going to focus on 3 of them today. And the first one is emotional self-awareness. So this is where I'm in touch with my emotions. I'm able to say to my wife, honey, I felt really insecure with those senior stakeholders today. Sadly, in many of our languages, we don't actually have words for emotions. So often when I teach on this, people say, I need vocab for emotions. Part of growing in emotional intelligence is actually having the vocab. And what I'm going to make available to us is an emotional wheel, Okay, I've given it to some of you. Some of you have seen it before in some of our meetings and so on. An emotional wheel that gives you vocabulary for emotions. Because it's one thing to say, I feel good today. But if you want to be more accurate, you might say, I'm feeling hopeful today. I'm feeling excited. I'm feeling elated. Do you see? And the more precise you are in terms of your emotional state, very often the deeper the connection and the bonding between you and another person. Even amongst us as men. I can go up to Juan and I can say, I'm feeling good about 2020. Or I can go up to Juan and say, Juan, I'm feeling so excited about the next few months. I'm actually feeling, I'm charged with hope right now. Can you see? I'm tapping into the exact feeling, and we connect at a deeper level when I'm more precise. Now, in a lot of our local languages, we don't have words for these things. How do you say in Zulu, honey, I felt very insecure with my boss today? What's the word for insecure in Zulu? Or in Shona? There's some Shona speaking people here. Kusagadzkana. I don't know. All right? But the point is, sometimes you literally have to go to a dictionary to find some of these words. You see, your words are your thoughts in symbolic form. Your words are your thoughts in symbolic form. So we don't have words for things that we don't conceptualize. If you just think about it. We don't have words for things we don't conceptualize. So the vocab aspect of emotions is crucial. Okay? Let's take this a bit further. I counsel lots of couples, and one thing I know is that women are tired of hearing bullet point responses from their husbands. They want to hear your emotional log. Our women are tired of, they ask, how was work? Fine. Good. Okay? They want to hear your emotional log. How did you feel? What happened? And when you go deeper with them, and there's that emotional intimacy, that opens a door to other forms of intimacy. But a lot of men today have got this thing where they want sexual intimacy with their spouses, but they're not willing to open up at an emotional level. Okay? Now, conventional time management speaks of what you do at different times of the day. So at 10 o'clock I did this, 12 o'clock I did that. Inner time management, ITM, inner time management, speaks of how was I feeling when I was doing it. Guys, I felt really drained at 3 p.m. yesterday when I was in this situation. When we focus on our inner time management, it actually helps us with emotional self-awareness. So I want to encourage you to make use of the emotional wheel that I'll make available to us on the group. Those of you who aren't on the group, please just give me your details. I think I've got everyone's details here, I think. But just let me know if you're not on the group, because I want to make sure that you actually, that you get it, okay? So important. Practice using those words, right, to communicate emotional honesty. Emotional self-awareness often requires vulnerability. That's the other thing. It often requires vulnerability, and many of us don't want to make ourselves vulnerable as men. We feel funny when we are vulnerable. You cannot develop emotional intimacy without some degree of vulnerability. You cannot develop emotional intimacy without some degree of vulnerability, even as us as men. If we want to build relationally, if we want to start these groups with men, we'll have to make ourselves vulnerable. We have to allow ourselves to be weak in front of each other, not to be robots. Because when we don't make ourselves vulnerable, you feel like you're relating to a robot, right? Vulnerability is the quality or state of being exposed to the possibility of being attacked or harmed. That's vulnerability. It's the quality or state of being exposed to the possibility of being attacked or harmed, either physically or emotionally. So some of the women, as they walk out of here, especially if it's at night, and there are all sorts of drunk people out there, and there are many cars, they can feel vulnerable physically. But there are times you can be in a meeting with someone else, and you're sharing your weaknesses at an emotional level. You feel vulnerable because you think, is this person going to use it against me? Is this person still going to respect me? Are they going to view me differently? So as men, we need to create a safe space so that we can express vulnerability. Otherwise, I'm just saying, be vulnerable, be vulnerable, be vulnerable. And people are saying, it's not a safe space, it's not a safe space, it's not a safe space. If you study the science of likability, you'll see that vulnerability is one of the qualities that gets people to like you. We tend to like people who are willing to make themselves vulnerable. We don't like people who always project an ideal image of themselves. It's counterintuitive, isn't it? But why is it that we're always trying to do that? In a church setting, you want to put your best foot forward and show your pastor that you are perfect, and you think he'll like you more if he sees perfection. You know, why? Not you guys here, but, you know, other people out there. So it's one thing, it's one thing to be angry. It's another thing to be aware of the impact of your anger. So when we're talking about emotional self-awareness, it's, I know I'm feeling angry right now, but then there's another step to it. I know the impact of my anger on those around me. And this is what a lot of people don't have. This is what a lot of people don't have. They feel a certain way, but they don't know the impact of their emotional state on other people. When you're excited, do you know what that does to your family? When you are sad and in a bad mood and you arrive home, do you know the impact it has on your family? Someone once said, consciously, I teach what I know. Unconsciously, I pass on who I am. We're always passing on who we are. And as men and as heads of our households, we have to be so conscious of that. I remember the other time, I had this sinus thing happening after I ran, and I was there, and I was quite irritable, and was coming through in how I was speaking at home. And I remember my wife saying, I don't think you're aware of how you are right now. You know, maybe it's because of what's happening in your nose or something, but I don't think you're aware of how you're coming across. And she was right. And she said to me, I think you need to be more watchful. Okay? And she was right. But the point is, that's part of emotional intelligence. Think about how you've been this last week. And my question to you is, how watchful have you been concerning your emotional state? And you know what I like about Jesus? Jesus was emotionally self-aware. He was in touch with his emotions. Shortest verse in the Bible, Jesus wept, right? John 11, round about verse 35, right? Jesus wept. So Jesus cried. So what I shared with you at the start, here's my son saying, Dad, do men cry? Dad, how come we've never seen you cry that much, right? He could have just gone straight to the Bible and seen Jesus wept. Jesus was affectionate. He also wept over Jerusalem, by the way. He felt for them because he says they're like sheep without a shepherd. How many of you men in this room have cried recently? Like in the last week, you've cried, like shedding a tear. Not necessarily crying, going, but tears coming out. How many of you? Raise your hand. Okay, even you, Joanne. Okay, that's good. I did it on purpose. I did it on purpose. How many? How many of you? A tear coming out. Even you, Paul. Yeah, it includes watching a movie. That's good for you, isn't it? I remember one guy, as long as it's not manipulative. I remember people were talking about arguments they have with their spouses and so on. And one guy says, yeah, just cry and it just solves everything and so on, okay? That's manipulation. All right. Now, emotional self-awareness helps you to know what you are passing on consciously and unconsciously. Okay? Research, for example, has found that the networks of men tend to be, and sorry for this, guys, tend to be shallower but wider than the networks of women. The networks of women tend to be narrower but deeper. The sad thing for ladies, and whenever I teach women, I say this to them, those networks of men that are shallower but wider tend to open more doors for them in terms of career and in terms of sales. Because as guys, when we meet each other, what we say, the first thing we ask is, what do you do? So what do you do? And we can give out our business cards quite easily. But a lot of times with ladies, they'll be like, I can't just do that, Paul. I need to have coffee with them first. And we need to just, get to know each other and so on, right? You find that the first thing a lot of women will ask when they meet each other, on average, there are obviously exceptions, they will ask about the relationships around the other woman. That's why sometimes I'll say to my wife, that lady who you often with at school, that other parent, what does she do? And my wife might say, I know she's going through a divorce. I know she's got the 3 girls. And she might not know what she does, what her occupation is, okay? But the fact is, our networks tend to be shallower. So we need skills to go deeper with people. Think about it. Some of us here in this room, we've known each other. We've known that there's an SFAT bander. We've known each other for a good 3 years or so. But often our relationships are superficial. Okay, as your pastor, I'm just looking around at everyone, and I've gone quite deep with quite a number of you, okay? So it's a good thing. It doesn't fully apply to me, actually. But this is good. I've gone quite deep with quite a number of you, right? But some of you in this room, let's be honest, you've seen each other often in and out of church and so on. And it's a skill set to nurture a relationship, to take it to a deeper level. Yeah? And that's what we want to encourage. That's what we want to encourage. So let's go a little bit deeper in this. Are we doing okay so far? Okay. Emotional self-awareness helps you to deepen your relationships. Bonding takes place to the degree to which we know someone and allow ourselves to be known. To know someone and to allow yourself to be known. You see, some of us, we like to pastor and shepherd lots of people, and we know them and we get to know them and we draw them out. But are we allowing ourselves to be known? That's where the vulnerability comes in. Many times people feel lonely and they blame the people around them. But the people around you aren't to blame. It's you who's to blame because you haven't opened up. Have you noticed that? You see, it's a choice. It's a choice. Brené Brown defines vulnerability as uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. Uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. And you know that in our marriages, on a daily basis, we've got a choice. Will I make myself vulnerable? Or will I be guarded to protect myself from danger? And it actually causes a lot of people to not be fully emotionally honest in a marriage situation. And we do it under the guise of, I'm protecting my spouse. I'm protecting our marriage so that we don't have a fight. And then we keep things from each other. And you know what happens? When you've got secrets, a secret is over your heart, and it becomes a barrier to your heart when you keep secrets, especially from your spouse. Something for us to watch out for. Okay? Marriage is about being vulnerable. There's a level of risk involved. Will they remain the same toward me or not? I like what a guy called Barton Goldsmith said. He said, intimacy can be intimidating. However, it is an amazingly freeing experience when you can be completely who you are with someone you totally trust. Isn't that powerful? It is an amazingly freeing experience when you can be completely who you are with someone you totally trust. Those of you who are married here, how many of you feel like you are completely yourself with your spouse? You know, with me, there are additional follow-through questions I can ask concerning that, and then you might have fewer hands going up. But that's impressive. That's very impressive. All right. Dr. Andra Brosh states that when you make yourself vulnerable, you are able to express your most sacred thoughts and feelings. You can share yourself with others authentically and without apology. You can share yourself with others authentically and without apology. Most men are raised to believe that cowboys don't cry, and they end up perceiving their emotions as a weakness that should be avoided at all costs. The capacity to be vulnerable depends on many things. Your capacity to be vulnerable depends on many things. Depends on your upbringing. Some of you grew up rough. You know what I'm talking about, right? And your default is, don't expose your weaknesses, right? It's also dependent on your level of courage. One of the things you've heard me say, some of you've heard me say this before, your opinion of me will not affect my destiny. Why do I say things like that? It's because I've had to go through a process of realizing what's the worst thing someone can do to me. You see, if your mindset is, I'm going to give these people so much power over me, wow, they'll affect my destiny. If I tell them that, oh, they'll affect my career, then you won't tell anyone anything. You know, in the workplace, sometimes you say to someone, okay, address that with your boss, and they're afraid. And you say, well, why can't you address it? Hey, Paul, it's career limiting. They've given that boss too much power over themselves. See, I've always known that, you know what, even when I was working for people, working under people, I've always known that, you know what, what's the worst thing the person can do to me? Paul, I don't want to work with you anymore. You're fired. I knew that I had skill, I had talent, I'll just bounce back and do my own thing. But I see with other people, they give so much power to the people around them. If my pastor thinks this and this of me, my life is over. It's not over. It's not over. My opinion of you, that won't affect your destiny. I don't have that much power over you. Okay? I know some people like to think they do, but no. So we fear God alone. Amen. We honor people appropriately, obviously, but we fear God alone. If you think of emotional expression as being weak, then you will resist being vulnerable. If you learn to value your own feelings and see them as important, you'll be more compelled to express yourself. Try to be clear about your needs. Examples might be, hey guys, I'm struggling at work and I need your support. Try to be clear about your needs. Or, you know what, I'm really feeling lonely in our relationship. You see, avoiding vulnerability results in disconnection. It results in you feeling unsupported. It results in loneliness. It results in disappointment. It results in lack of transparency, unconfessed sin, emotional distance, feeling misunderstood, anxiety gaps. The second aspect of EQ I want to highlight to you this afternoon is what we call emotional management or emotional containment. So I can know that I'm feeling angry, but part of good emotional intelligence is I can control my anger. You see, with some people you hear them saying, I just couldn't help it. You've heard that phrase before, hey? Hey, I just couldn't help it. Part of your emotional intelligence is being able to control what comes out of your mouth. Tomorrow I'm going to be speaking on that subject, by the way. The sanctified tongue. The sanctified tongue. Many people are self-aware, but unfortunately they have not yet mastered the art of managing their emotions. So my question to you is, what's your primary way of influencing people? We've all learned different tactics in terms of influencing people, haven't we? Do you influence people by talking to them or by shouting at them? How many of you are talkers? You just talk. You like to just sit down and have a conversation. How many of you are shouters? With the kids. The way Paul is saying, but with the kids, it's like it's okay. Yeah, no, with the kids, yeah. Okay. You see, we learned certain things because of how we grew up. If you grew up and you had temper tantrums, you know, with temper tantrums, right? Temper tantrums, if you allow your kids to have temper tantrums, you know what will happen? You're just teaching them how to manipulate people. Because if they know that, oh, I can get what I want by having a temper tantrum, that same child, when they grow up, they become the boss who does the same thing. That's how they intimidate people and they control people through their temper. So sometimes we have to unlearn certain habits that we developed in terms of the art of influence, okay? I remember there was a time when my kids were fighting. They were in a fight, the three of them together. It was a combo, okay? And so it was physical. It was between two of them, and then the other one joined in. And it was interesting because I actually had to say to them, I tried to stop them and I said, guys, you know what? You need to actually have a conversation about this. And then one of them asked me innocently, so Dad, what am I supposed to do when my brother does XYZ to me? It was almost as if for him the only logical solution was physical force. And here's Dad coming and saying, no, we don't do that. Okay, and this is quite recent. This was like 2019. This was like this last year. Because there's something in us as men, when our testosterone kicks in, it's almost like all those other rules of civilization go away, and there's one way of doing things. And you see it with road rage, don't you? You see it with road rage. The other day I saw, like, I was driving, and I was by some robots, and right in the middle of the intersection, there's a taxi, and then there's this other vehicle, like a bakkie. And I didn't want to, you don't want to mess around with the guy who was in the bakkie. He looked like, he had like a bullfrog sort of face. Like. And then they were hooting at each other, and they were literally like facing each other head on. The guy in the bakkie and the guy in the taxi, beep, 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 like who's going to give way? In the end, the taxi gave way. I was nervous because our vehicle was right there, my kids were there, and I was thinking like, you know what, we better get out of this environment. But there's something in us as men where we've learned certain habits of influence. Part of emotional containment is being able to say, that fleshly thing that wants to rise up and influence in a carnal way, I need to die to that. And I need to have the fruit of the Spirit functioning in how I influence people. Not so. Okay? So talking didn't seem to be high on my son's list. Okay? The reality is that as men, we have large doses of testosterone in our bodies. Steve Biddulph, in his book Raising Boys, one of the books I've got at home, describes how from the age of 6, even boys who haven't watched television suddenly want to play with swords, wear Superman capes, wrestle, etc. Right? The reality is that every man needs a beauty to rescue. That's just how God made us. Every man needs a beauty to rescue. Often when I'm speaking to couples, I like to tell them that. And then I say to the woman, so you need to be rescuable, okay? Because if the woman doesn't want to be rescued, it becomes a bit tricky. And that's, I'm not blaming the woman for this, but often when you see guys going off and having affairs and so on, if they've been married to this strong woman who doesn't want to be rescued in any way, you see that they end up attracted to a woman who's rescuable, who's just there, a damsel in distress. And then this guy is going and saying, oh, I'll sort it out for you, because he feels like a hero with that person, but at home feels like a zero. Okay, so these are things for us to think about. Okay? Now, I like to challenge men, and I like to say to them, the safest place in the world for your wife should be in your arms. The safest place for your wife should be in your arms. But sadly, for a lot of women, this has become the most dangerous place. A lot of wives today, you hear them literally saying like, listen, you know what, I don't feel safe with you. And they go and they pour out to other men, sadly. And you say, why did you go to this other man and talk about these intimate things? He listened to me. He listened to me. When we're not strong on emotional containment, we create an environment in our marriages where our spouse does not feel safe with us. Go and ask your wife when you go home, or your future wife, Justin, one day. One day you'll ask her that. Unless you've already met her now, I don't know. We haven't chatted in a while about these things, Justin. But go and ask her and say, do you feel safe with me? And if they say, not all the time, ask, can you tell me when do you feel safe and when don't you feel safe? And I can guarantee you, they'll say, I don't feel safe with you when you do X, Y, Z. And when she's talking about X, Y, Z, it's a time where you haven't contained your emotions. It's a time where they feel like you're talking to me like one of those workmen on that construction site. You know, sometimes we don't switch roles, eh? We're talking to guys and we're in work mode, and then now we get home and we're still in that same mode. That's lack of emotional intelligence. You see. Part of your emotional intelligence is what we call relationship management or adapting and connecting. I'm not going into it today, right? But it's relationship management. There's a way I'll relate to Juan because I understand him. But there's a way I'll relate to Tendai because I understand him. There's a way I'll relate to Ashburn because I understand him. For those of us raising boys, it's great to wrestle with them, but they also need us to do gentler things like quiet storytelling. I've tried to help my boys to communicate their emotions verbally instead of physically. You know, when boys are still very young, 2, 3, you literally have to coach them. How are you feeling right now? Can you tell me in words? Because they don't have as many words as girls. Girls are so sophisticated, aren't they? You know, they've got lots of language and they can say all sorts of things, and sometimes it's overwhelming. Boys, they're feeling angry, they act it out. Why is the boy now kicking the dog? Fortunately, my kids didn't do that, okay? Why is the boy now just painting his room like that? What's going on? They act out their emotions instead of talking about them. So we have to help them to actually articulate their emotions. Your personal development is the best gift that you can give the people around you. If you have anger issues, it's fixable. But deal with it soon because it impacts those around you in a lasting manner. In marriage, we can often get hardened and we can often become angry. One of the ways one can overcome anger is by understanding the stages of anger. And I want to touch on this before we do our third and final one. So how do we get angry? How many of you sometimes get angry? Okay. Everyone except for Ashburn, okay? And Jaden, okay? Yeah, Jaden, in fact, I've heard about you that you're very chilled and so on. It's like nothing affects him, or he internalizes it or something. Oh, okay. Reminding me of the Incredible Hulk, Mr. McGee, don't make me angry. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry. Anyway, so this is how anger works, guys. It starts off as frustration. And in a day, we have about 30 frustrations a day. Obviously, it depends on who you are, right? Maybe 20 to 30. So if you go and you pour your milk into your tea in the morning, and then you taste your tea and you see that the milk was off, it's frustrating, right? If you then get into your vehicle and you're late for a meeting, but then you look and you see that your petrol or your diesel is on E, you've got an empty tank, it's frustrating. So we have about 20 to 30 or so of those per day. Now you can keep it at the level of, I was just frustrated. Excuse me. How does it become anger? So it's on a continuum. How does it become anger? In split seconds, this is what happens. That frustration, that mild irritation, right, that you experience can literally go from mild irritation to taking it out on inanimate objects. You know when people kick something, kick a wall. How does that happen in split seconds? Or they hit someone. That's lack of emotional containment. You're not managing your emotions. It goes from frustration to blame. The moment you blame someone else, I told her she must check the sell-by date. Or I told him he must check the sell-by date. The moment you already begin to assign blame for your frustration, guess what's happening? It's shifting gears from frustration to anger because it's now pointed at someone, isn't it? Okay? And we see this happening. And one of the things I've learned is that with the same measure you judge, you'll be judged. The moment I start to assign blame, I like to have a thing where I'm saying, Holy Spirit, just remind me that I've also done the same thing. And it's literally in all areas of life. I can't think of one area where I can criticize my wife for a particular thing that I've never done myself. And when you have that type of brokenness where you're aware of your own frailty, you're not quick to assign blame. Does that make sense? Okay? One of the areas I tend to assign blame is if people leave things lying around, because it attracts cockroaches and so on, right? They don't pack away things and so on. And I just remember earlier on today, we made some pizza and I left the pizza bases on the counter. I was really tired. I really wanted to go up. I wanted to go and pray on my bed and then maybe sleep type of thing. And I was thinking to myself, Paul, as I was going upstairs, you are always telling people that they must sort out things on a counter. You need to practice what you preach. Paul, do you know that if you don't go and put those things away, you've got no legal right to now keep saying to your family, guys, do it, in that self-righteous manner that you always do. I was just so tired. And I was just like, yeah, you know what? I'll also need grace. And I went and all right? So you start off with frustration, and then it goes to blame. And then the third stage is that person deserves to be punished. See, it's one thing for me to blame you. It's another thing for me to say, and you deserve to be punished. Right? I'm not the one punishing you, but you deserve it. So if you're upset with your spouse concerning something and you blame them for the particular thing, when they come back at the end of the day, for example, and they say, oh, I had such a terrible time at work, the people were so nasty. Like my boss said, A, B, C, D. If there's something in you that's like, yeah, good, it's good, you're learning. Yeah, you're toughening up. It's from that mindset that says, you deserve to be punished. I wasn't the one who punished you, but at least, yeah, it's coming back to you now. Okay? And then very quickly after that, it goes on to, I will punish you. I will punish you. So we end up punishing the individual. And sometimes the way we punish people is through emotional withdrawal. And in our minds, we're convinced we're not punishing them. In our minds, we're like, no, I didn't say anything horrible. But a lot of good things that we could have done for the person, we've withheld. And when we're at that level, we speak to them in a certain way sometimes. There was one lady from Boeing, and she was being taught these principles, and her response was like, yeah, but my kids are always doing stuff that I don't like. My husband is always doing stuff, but I don't go out and punish them. And she was asked, what do you do then? I just leave them alone, and I carry on with my stuff, and so on. And she realized very quickly that she was punishing them through emotional withdrawal. Emotional withdrawal. This is a big thing in our families, guys. And part of your emotional intelligence is being aware of it, Being aware of your emotional state. Because a lot of times, we're actually not aware of it. We just block people out, block them off. And your wife comes in, she's feeling rejected, she's feeling lonely, she's feeling isolated. And when you trace it, you realize that it's actually how I've been punishing her because she didn't do this, she didn't do that. Unfortunately, harboring anger and acting violently as a result does very little to make the situation better. If anything, it can lead to more misery through regrettable occurrences. That's why you have these passions of crime, right? Crimes of passion. Where you have this person murdered their spouse, and you wonder, well, how did that end up happening? It's the pent-up anger. This is why we must not go to sleep angry. In your anger, do not sin. Must always be releasing people, it's actually a standard prayer to keep praying. Lord, if there's anyone where I'm holding something here, I just choose to release them. I will not be offended. I choose to love them. The third one and final one that we're going to look at is social awareness or empathy. So what was the first one? Emotional self-awareness. This is how I'm feeling. The second one was emotional containment or emotional management. I'm feeling this way, but I manage the emotion. The third one that we're looking at is social awareness or empathy. You see, I can be aware of my emotional state, that I'm feeling angry, right? But then we're now in a meeting together, and afterwards someone says, did you notice Sean wasn't himself today? Is he going through something? Just an example. Is he going through stuff? Did you pick it up? And someone else will be like, no, I didn't notice at all. It just seemed the usual Sean. So one person has social awareness, the other one doesn't. And especially if you're a task-orientated person, you tend to then block out everything else and you just focus on the task, right? And you're not fully aware of what's happening around you. There's some people like that. One of the quickest ways of getting another human being to like you and to connect with you is empathy. Empathy. So empathy basically comes from two Latin words, em and pathos. It literally means feeling into. It literally means wearing someone else's moccasins. And there's what we call empathic listening. So Sipho can share with me what he's going through, right? If I don't really engage with him fully in terms of empathy, I will just hear the facts. I won't hear the emotion. So there were people in his family that were sick in the last couple of weeks, right? And I got the updates via WhatsApp. Hey, we'll pray for you and so on. We'll pray for you guys. We prayed. That's one level. But today when he was unpacking what he was going through, there was greater opportunity for empathy on my part because I'm now hearing it with the emotion that it comes with. Does that make sense? One of the people in the church, they were going through some stuff in their marriage and so on. They called me and they said, Pastor Paul, I want you to hear my story so you really understand why I've made such and such a decision concerning my marriage. And I thought to myself, but I've already heard the person's story. They began to tell me certain facts that they had told me before, a lot of the things. But you know what? I pressed pause on my judgment because I could have been like, but I already know that. And you know what I did? I felt I needed to listen with empathy and feel the person's pain. And what was so powerful is afterwards, it connected us, but what also happened was I say to the individual, you know what? A lot of the things that you shared with me today, it was a long phone call, you've shared with me before. But what was different was today I'm hearing the emotion. I'm hearing the emotion. When you listen to your lady with empathy, this takes your emotional intimacy to another level. It's about wearing someone else's shoes. If I were to ask you right now, how is your person feeling? Your spouse, Justin, your dad, your sister, your brother. How is your person feeling? Would you know? Sipho said to me, you know what, my wife and I, we had a heart-to-heart last night up until 3 a.m. just talking about, hey, where are you at? How are you feeling? So I know he knows where she's at. Can you see sometimes with empathy, you literally have to prepare yourself for it. You literally have to say, you know what? So for example, my wife is doing the mid-mile. She's away this weekend in, you know, the mid-mile, the swim. She's doing the charity one. So it's like 4 miles each day. She's done 4 miles today of swimming and then 4 miles tomorrow. So in total, it's 8 miles. It's about 13 Ks or so of swimming, okay? Anyway, so she's away. But I can literally say to myself, you know what? She's going to be back Sunday afternoon. I can actually start preparing myself now to say, when she gets back, what's my mood going to be? When she gets back, how can I just listen to her and draw out? Yes, I've got many of my own stories. And sometimes my default might be to say, hey, yeah, my run went really well. Hey, yeah, I managed to do my personal best. Yeah, and then I'm just talking. But I can prepare myself now and say, I want to practice empathy. And there are 3 types of empathy. The first type is emotional empathy. Some of you have heard me share this before. Emotional empathy, which is I feel you. So if I say, guys, I've got a headache, you say, oh, where's it sore? So you carry on lecturing and teaching, you've got a headache. Oh, man, how do you do it? Okay, I don't really have a headache. It's just an example, right? Some of you already, like Tendai was already like, are you okay, Paul? Can I get you a Panado? I could see, like, the way he was looking at me, that he was concerned. Anyway, so that's I feel you. Each time you're engaging with another human being, show them that I feel you, right? The second type of empathy is cognitive empathy, and cognitive empathy is I get you. And you communicate that through active listening. Active listening. If I say, Paul, who's your best friend? He'll say, it's so-and-so. And then I'll say, why is he your best friend? And he'll say, he gets me. I don't have to pretend when I'm around him, I can be myself. And often it's communicated through active listening. It's someone who will be saying to you, I follow your logic. I see where you're coming from. Ah, yeah, because it's you, Paul, I know why you made that decision. They're not saying I agree with you all the time, but they're saying I get you. So powerful. And then the third type of empathy is empathic concern, which is I'm here for you. I'm here for you. It's where you do something practical for someone. And you know what the interesting thing is? Very often people need all three. There was a time I was teaching this principle to some people. It was a team in a pharmaceutical company, and I was teaching them this, and I did have a migraine. And 3 different people showed me the 3 different types of empathy on that particular day. 3 different people showed me the 3 different types of empathy on that particular day. Some time ago, my wife was not feeling well, and she said to me, my love, I'm not feeling well. And I said, don't worry, I've got everything covered. I'll sort out the dinner. I'll sort out the kids. Don't worry about it. So I'm thinking I'm being the hero, but I was actually showing her one type of empathy, empathic concern. I'm here for you, right? Later on that evening, she said to me, I don't know if you really understand how I'm feeling. It's like I've got this thing sitting on my head, and she started going in detail how she was feeling. Of course, I was defensive. And I was like, of course I understand how you're feeling. That's why I've been doing this, I've been doing this, I've been doing this. Charlton, you get me on that. You're feeling me on that. Okay. And then she went to, but because I understood this principle, I was able to say back to her, you know what? What's going on is, what you need from me right now is emotional empathy. What I've been showing you is empathic concern. You see? I was counseling someone, I was counseling a couple actually, premarital counseling recently, not from this church. And they'd gone through my book, they've been going through my book, Make Your Marriage Work, and in it, I talk about the different types of empathy and so on. And it was so interesting because this guy, he's got a good memory, he's one of those smart people with good memories, and he was regurgitating it back to me. It's nice when you've written a book and people like regurgitate the stuff back. And he says, yeah, hey, concerning empathy, those 3 types, I think I'm just strong on the cognitive empathy and empathic concern. But hey, emotional empathy, yeah, that's my weakness. It's like he had measured himself, you know, in the whole thing. Ask yourself, what muscle do you need to work on when it comes to empathy? What muscle do you need to work on when it comes to empathy? Something else that we need to avoid when it comes to social awareness is stonewalling. The Gottman Institute describes stonewalling as one of the major causes of divorce and marital breakdown. This is when you literally shut down intentionally during conflict. Stonewalling is the refusal to communicate or express oneself emotionally, often during conflict. And I know some of you do that, right? Sadly, the result is you end up becoming like 2 ships passing each other by. And you'll say to us, we never fight. We haven't fought in the last year. But what's actually happening is you're experiencing stonewalling, and it's a precursor to divorce. You know when people numb themselves, and it's like, Paul, I don't feel anything anymore. Paul, we just passed each other by. You relate to your spouse like divorced people relate to each other. They just talk about admin, they just talk about the kids. So watch out for stonewalling, because when you do that, your spouse feels rejected. When a woman stonewalls, a guy typically feels frustrated because he can't talk. But when a guy stonewalls, usually his wife feels abandoned and rejected. So for those of you, and I know some of you, I don't want to single out people, but I know some of you who don't like conflict, you don't like drama, and to avoid the drama, you basically just keep quiet. It's nice for me because I've counseled many of you, so I know the stories. I think that's why people are nice to me. It's like I know too much about them. They have to either kill me or be my best friend. It's like that. Anyway, thanks, guys. So that's very important. Men often feel overwhelmed when their wives want to talk feelings. Okay? When we stonewall, we often see our women as nagging because they want to talk. What behaviors associated with stonewalling are killing empathy and social awareness in your relationship? Some of these are discomfort discussing feelings, minimizing your spouse's concerns, refusal to respond to questions, that's stonewalling, walking away from a discussion, shutting down your spouse by saying, that's it and that's final, or resigning by just saying, whatever. Having a mumbling monotone and changing the subject. All of these behaviors erode empathy and real connection with another human being. So the antidote to stonewalling, I believe, is listening with empathy and authentic engagement. That's the antidote to stonewalling. And so here, in conclusion, are some practical benefits of listening. Listening builds up your spouse in at least 3 aspects of their self-esteem. They will feel more significant as a person when you listen to them. That sense of, I matter. They will feel a greater sense of worth. Hey, my perspective is worth hearing. They will feel more secure. I'm loved and prioritized. There's no competition with work. There's no competition with sports or with kids. I come first in his life. You see, listening helps to prevent isolation. The other person doesn't feel alone. Some of the best conversations I've had with my wife are the ones where I'm just listening. And afterwards she says, sure, I really enjoyed that conversation. But I didn't say that much, I was listening. Charlton is feeling me again on that one. Okay? So this feeling of isolation is one of the biggest marriage killers, by the way. It's when you feel lonely in your marriage. It's one of the biggest marriage killers. Hence the importance of addressing emotional intimacy in marriage. Listening draws out the sub-conversations. Someone can speak to you at a surface level, but when you truly listen to them, it's like you're peeling those layers of the onion, okay? And you end up unraveling the layers. Often your spouse may be protesting, so they're critical towards you, but they're really protesting, and there's actually a deeper need. And it's so powerful when you don't react to their protest, but you actually say, my love, what's going on underneath this? What do you need from me right now? It just softens everything. And it's a sign of maturity when you're able to do that. This is social awareness, so crucial. Okay? Instead of reacting to the protest, rather listen for the sub-conversation. This is the thing they really want to communicate, but they can't find their words, or they just don't feel safe. They may say, you're working too hard and don't have time for your health and for the children. A good response? Oh, this seems to have affected you. Why do you feel so strongly about this? What's going on? After 10 minutes of listening to her, she might say, I guess I'm just missing you. She now feels safe to communicate the need. That's the sub-conversation. She feels safer to communicate her real needs when she knows you're truly listening. Have you noticed that listening also helps you to scratch where it's really itching? Listening builds emotional intimacy. Emotional intimacy is built one conversation at a time and often results in sexual intimacy, by the way. Often we make demands for sexual intimacy without taking time to build emotional intimacy. Finally, listening helps you to understand your spouse. The best marriages stem from working hard to study your spouse. Listening is the primary vehicle for truly learning about your spouse. Who are they, and what do they need from me right now? So what are the three things we've covered in terms of emotional intelligence? Is emotional self-awareness, there's emotional containment or emotional management, and then there's social awareness and empathy. The fourth pillar that we didn't cover today is relationship management, and that we can do another time. Okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to stop there, and we're going to have a discussion for the last 15 to 20 minutes or so. We're going to have a discussion, and you will share what jumped out at you. The key thing I'd like us to talk about is, what did you learn? What are you going to start doing differently? And who are you going to tell about this? Who are you going to pass this on to?